On a September evening in 1939, a car drove slowly through the country lanes of Kent. It turned into a sleepy village and headed onwards to an RAF base, where its occupant drank a toast to his friends and neighbours before heading home. He had a heavy heart, as he knew what the morning would bring. The man was Winston Churchill. The base was Biggin Hill, and tomorrow, Britain would once again go to war with Germany. In the year that followed, Biggin Hill Air Base would become known throughout the country for its dashing young pilots, its brave WAFs, and the unflinching courage of the local villagers.
Biggin Hill was the main fighter command station during the Battle of Britain, and they did bear the brunt of it.
It was there, it was happening, and you just got on with it.
Pilots took on the full onslaught of the German Air Force.
You know someone's going to get killed, but you just hope it's not going to be you.
While little boys revelled in the adventure.
The noise as it taxis past is boom, 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 boom.
Shrapnel fell from the air like rain, hot rain.
The whole of the war was so exciting that, everything else afterwards was nothing.
The Battle of Britain would see defiant men and women defend their island and guarantee Biggin Hill's place in the history books.
Everybody did what was expected of them.
So I'm glad I lived through it, but again, I could have done without it.
Spring 1940, and the quiet village of Biggin Hill, perched on the North Downs of Kent, was seemingly untouched by the ongoing crisis in Europe.
The Biggin Hill Valley, which is now full of houses, in those days was totally empty, just a few shacks down there where people lived.
Peaceful little flowery places. It always seemed to be sunny.
My memory of being a child would be the smell of the lorry loads of strawberries going to the village, and it was a strong smell.
The only noise you could hear was us kids screaming their heads off,
Biggin Hill had been a small airbase since 1918, but over 6 crucial months in 1940, it would play a vital role in Britain's front line. Just down the road from Winston Churchill's family home of Chartwell, 17 miles southeast of London, Biggin Hill was well placed to defend England's vulnerable Channel coast and be the last stand against any German attack on the capital. And it was becoming clear the Germans were getting closer.
We heard that Denmark and Norway had been invaded, and we thought, sort of knowing a little bit about the geography of Europe and that, things, they're trying to surround us.
The world was changing, and with the RAF arriving in droves, so was Biggin Hill.
Everywhere at our end was barbed wire. You couldn't get past it if you wanted to,
There's guards at this end at Biggin Hill and at Leeds Green, the other end of the airfield.
They were sort of like military police.
Arriving back from a family holiday, 6-year-old Jeff Greensmith returned to find his parents' cafe next to the base had become a foreign landscape.
We got back to the house and we had hedges in front. We had a tea lawn there. They'd taken the hedge up, ripped that out, and replaced it with coils of barbed wire, like big springs, like the slinkies that you can walk downstairs with. A bit like a prison camp, quite frankly. It upset me slightly because this was not the house that I'd left only 10, 15 days before.
You couldn't go through the aerodrome, and quite honestly I think we would have been a bit frightened to go down there. We thought that's where the war was happening.
I remember the Spitfires arriving from the north of England and see the last of them land, and we actually gave them a hand to push them under the trees.
Looking back as an adult, those airmen were so young. They were probably only 18-year-olds, weren't they? They weren't much older than us.
Among the RAF pilots who would take on the Germans that summer was Sergeant Pilot Tony Pickering. Brought up in Rugby, the grammar school boy had initially joined the RAF Voluntary Reserve.
When I joined the squadron, I was 19, very young, very inexperienced with life, tell you the truth. I became a pilot because people of my age in 1938-39 realised a war was coming. And I'd seen pictures of the trench warfare. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to sit in a trench and be bombed.
23-year-old Jimmy Corbin had joined the RAF as soon as he'd finished higher education. A Kent local, he was born and bred in Maidstone, and had his own way of dealing with the war.
I enjoyed taking the mickey out of people. And Mark, and to do that, you've got to, if you dish it out, you've got to learn to take it. I always wanted to fly. And I started flying. I wanted to join the Royal Air Force. But then, of course, they double-crossed me and declared a war.
Women liked them a lot because they were nice fellas.
They did
very smart.
They did attract the girls.
One dashing young pilot, Douglas Grice, even became a poster boy for the RAF.
My father was used for advertising for the Royal Air Force. He was gazing at the sky, encouraging all others to join up as he did.
Grice, affectionately known as Grubby, joined the RAF in 1938.
My father had a strong sense of duty, always had throughout his life, so I believe that he knew what his duties were, and his one aim was to fulfil them as best he could.
Along with the pilots, hundreds of ground crew and service personnel had also come to Biggin Hill, some with their families. For 8-year-old Peter Halliday, it was all a big adventure.
I mean, I was mad, aeroplane mad anyway. You know, to have aeroplanes flying over, I was excited. Dad was a carpenter in Civvy Street before he joined the Air Force. That's how he got posted to Biggin Hills, because the aircraft they were flying from Biggin Hill at the time were mostly wooden construction. He repaired patches on them, holes in them. Apparently they all said his paintwork was brilliant. You know.
On the 10th of May, the people of Biggin Hill saw their neighbour, Winston Churchill, become British Prime Minister. By the end of the month, Hitler had taken most of France and triggered the evacuation of British troops from Dunkirk. Churchill was facing the threat of a German invasion.
This man was not going to be beaten. He knew about the quality of the RAF and talked about these young men who would fight, and convinced the British people that we were in safe hands with the pilots of the Battle of Britain.
When we listened to his speeches, of course, and we realised that we were fighting against an evil.
Germany had won the Battle of France and were now preparing their assault on Britain, known as Operation Sea Lion. Hitler's plan was first to take control of the skies by destroying Britain's air force, and then send thousands of troops across the Channel for a decisive land invasion. As German forces prepared, Biggin Hill pilots were sent to patrol the French coast, among them poster boy Grubby Grice.
We'd been sent to patrol Abbeville, I think it was. We'd taken off from Biggin Hill, and we crossed the coast at the mouth of the Seine, I suppose. And suddenly, 2 or 3 miles ahead, we saw some big black bombers.
The bombers were a dozen German Heinkels, and the British pilots were in a dogfight.
I got in a nice long burst when there was a bang, and immediately my cockpit filled with vapour. Being slightly afraid of fire, I switched off and glided, and knew that I had to do a belly landing in a field somewhere.
It was a week before his 21st birthday.
Stop. Regret to inform you that your son, Pilot Officer Douglas Grice, is reported as missing as the result of air operations on 8 June. Stop. Letter follows. Stop. Any further information will be immediately communicated to you. Stop. Under Secretary of State, Air Ministry. I think it took him 3 days to get back to Biggin Hill. There were stories about how he tried to steal a car outside a bakery shop in Rouen. They eventually found an airfield, and then the following day he was back at Biggin Hill. There is a further telegram. Air Ministry, pleased to inform you that your son, Pilot Officer Douglas Grice, is now reported safe.
While Grubby had been finding his way back from France, Hitler was almost ready to begin his assault on Britain. In July 1940, the German Air Force began their attacks. Grubby Grice had got home in time for the Battle of Britain. 16 weeks of furious fighting lay ahead. The opening exchanges of the battle were fought over the Channel as the Germans targeted British supplies. Attacks would start in the morning and finish around 6 in the evening. For the pilots of Biggin Hill, it was almost civilised.
The first thing in the day was being woken up with a cup of tea in your bed, maybe 5 o'clock in the morning, depending what time you were on duty. We'd get dressed for combat, get our May Wests on.
You just sit around the disposal hut and you either read, you talk, you sleep, or you gamble and play cards.
We were on standby most of the time. We did nothing else but just stand and wait.
Then suddenly the bloody telephone would ring. The boy who answered it would tell him to swaddle scramble.
When the scramble was called, there was a big rush.
So all we had to do was quickly run about 40 or 50 yards.
They'd left their parachutes in the aircraft. They used to jump in and we used to put the straps over them.
2 minutes from getting the call, we would start moving and would attempt to get into the air within 3 to 4 minutes.
The village boys of Biggin Hill watched on with eager eyes as the pilots flew off into the distance to fight.
The noise as it taxis past is boom, 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 boom. Believe me, if you've got sort of 12 Merlins really well tuned, crashing away, it shook the windows, it shook the cups and saucers and the ornaments. You knew that something was happening.
You see, open up the front, you felt the surge of power.
You felt you'd got the control of something in front of you, that engine in front of you and the airframe. You had to treat it with respect.
It was like nothing else, but I loved it.
In the opening weeks of the Battle of Britain, Biggin Hill pilots downed 38 German planes and lost 18 of their own. So far, the battle had been fought over the Channel, but as German tactics changed, the British air bases themselves were about to become the target. For the people of Biggin Hill, the Battle of Britain was about to get very close to home.
Just as long as the Spitfires were in the sky, we thought we were okay.
The heat of summer had arrived, and so had the war. For Biggin Hill in Kent, August was to be a long, hard, tragic month. The Battle of Britain had begun with fighting over the Channel, but as the Luftwaffe pushed forward, the squadrons of Biggin Hill began to battle right over the orchards of Kent. Hitler's plan? To destroy the RAF and then invade Britain. With the pilots scrambling up to 3 times a day, the local residents on the ground found themselves in the thick of the action.
You were always listening for something. You were listening for aircraft engines, you were listening for gunfire, heavy anti-aircraft fire, light anti-aircraft fire. You were listening to air raid sirens, the warning and the all clear, and you were listening for church bells as well in case the Germans were invading.
If you were near a shelter, you went into it. That was one. You didn't go in other people's shelters without being invited. You went into your own one.
Mum used to. We had the old gramophone, which she reckoned to keep us happy and all this, which were pre-war records. Oh, Teddy Bear's Picnic. If you go down and let people sit down, you get better. It's a bright.
So far, Biggin Hill itself wasn't a target for the Germans. They were attacking the radar and communication stations scattered across the coast and southeast of England. The people on the ground were safe.
It seemed quite pointless. You sat in there, no damage was ever done to your properties. You might just well stand outside and watch what was going on, which my mother allowed us to do.
Radar was a revolutionary new technology and something Hitler did not have. It gave the British forces a fighting chance against the Luftwaffe because they knew exactly how many planes were coming and could target their response. Which was just as well, because the German Air Force outnumbered the RAF.
The dogfights were, I suppose, a bit like aerial ballet. They were beautiful. Aeroplanes wheeled and ducked and dived, and engines revved and engines cut out, and a distant rat-a-tat-a-tat, bop, 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 bop.
It's a bloody long way up, but the gunfire, machine gun fire, is like, it sounds like somebody ripping a piece of cloth.
And if you could imagine there was a row of these bombers, say about 10 of them, and they've all got their guns firing at you and your colleagues, so the sky was full of little red flashes coming towards you, and the odd thud, if it hit the aircraft, we just fired.
These things happen so quickly. You've got to realise that they were travelling at 300 miles an hour, so were we.
The whining of aircraft sort of trying to get into position with one another.
It was invariably 1-to-1, or even with the Germans at that time with numbers, it was about 5-to-1.
You got over that feeling of France, you got used to it. And I must admit that my main concern was not to be a bloody hero, but to stay alive. And I had a very good sense of self-preservation.
3 squadrons with up to 12 pilots each, flying Spitfires and Hurricanes, took off from Biggin Hill every day. The children on the ground were transfixed.
It was fantastic fun. I mean, nobody's going to tell me that it wasn't exciting, because it was. The whole of the war was so exciting that, you know, everything else afterwards was nothing.
Shrapnel fell from the air like rain, hot rain. You became an expert in ordnance, things that dropped from the sky, bits and pieces of bombs, caps from shells. These were collected and traded. They had currency.
We had our, what we call, shrapnel barons. You know, some of the blokes, they sort of made a business almost out of it. I reckon they sort of got a basic business started on it.
One of these was probably worth 15 or 20 of those.
I have here a piece of a German Messerschmitt. We came up out of the shelter, and the headmaster said, now during the morning a German aeroplane has blown up overhead. There are bits all along the bank below Sutherland Avenue in all the gardens down there, and you're not to touch a bit of it. And a big smile came on his face, and we all rushed for the gates. It wasn't found, it was removed from the wreckage. I must say I'm the guilty party, but there were lots of other guilty parties.
As the battles raged above, the whole village was watching the drama unfold.
If you saw one with flames coming out the back of it, you'd think, good, he's got that one, you know. Never thought it was good, you know, perhaps one of our planes were coming down. We just thought we were winning.
Fighting a powerful and aggressive air force, the boys in the sky faced a relentless battle.
By August, we were very tired. It was an exhausted Air Force. We'd lost a number of very good pilots, and the replacements were just inexperienced. 5-6 hours flying a Spitfire, in some cases having never used their guns at all and being asked to go into battle.
But they were holding firm, and the home advantage was proving crucial. Because the battle was being fought in the skies above Britain, German pilots who bailed were out of the war for good. RAF pilots could be back in a plane and back in action the very same day, as Tony Pickering discovered.
I could see the flashes of the German guns from the front gunners of the bombers, and I felt a thud when they hit my aircraft, and I came down from about 18,000 feet down to about 3,000 with smoke pouring out of my aircraft, and then I saw flames appearing.
And August the 15th would see Grubby Grice facing life or death yet again.
Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a flash, and the next moment the cockpit was full of flames. The heat was enormous.
We knew as soon as flame appeared on that engine, just a few feet in front of you, 2 or 3 feet sitting in front of you, we knew we wouldn't last. And I never thought even, I was over the side in a split second. All I had to do was pull a pin, raise myself, and I was out.
There I was, falling away, floating down under a marvellous canopy. I could look down and see the land. So I thought, well, at least I won't be going into the sea.
Well, it was a wonderful feeling. I can assure you, once you felt that parachute open and you could look down and see the green fields of England below you, you thought to yourself, oh, wonderful. When you're shot down, you think very, very quickly. And you think to yourself, well, yes, thank goodness, I'm okay. Back I go to fight another day.
But bailing out is one thing, surviving is another.
Well, very shortly after that, I was over the coast, and a few minutes later, I was a mile out to sea, and a few minutes after that, I was 2 miles out to sea. Well, the splash happened, and I got rid of my harness. Tried to blow up my Mae West. I wasn't terribly successful, because something seemed to have happened to my face. There were sort of bits of skin flapping around my eyes, and my mouth felt very uncomfortable. Of course, I'd been burned.
Grubby was one of a number of pilots who had bailed out. In the 5 weeks since the Battle of Britain had begun, 17 pilots flying out of Biggin Hill had failed to return.
Bloody madness. You know someone's going to get killed, but you just hope it's not going to be you.
I mean, you regretted losing a friend. A friend had gone into the ground, but there was a war going on and we had to get on with it. You had to take it really from your mind at that time, and it wasn't until later on, until the war had ended, you started to think about the comrades you lost and how you lost them.
A lot died, poor buggers. It's a terrible shame of it. Boys of 19 years old, you know. In the prime of life, intelligent, fit boys, boom, gone.
Fortunately for Grubby, he did make it back, but at a price.
Third time unlucky, because after that, well, he felt that he had lost his nerve, and he never flew operationally again.
The seawater had helped Pilot Officer Grice's recovery from horrific burns, and he would continue to do his bit, transferring to the ops room for the remainder of the war. With the Battle of Britain teetering on a knife edge, Hitler now raised the stakes. Unable to destroy the RAF in the air, he decided to attack them on the ground and began bombing the airfields themselves. The people of Biggin Hill were about to feel the full force of the Luftwaffe.
Then the noise started. The bombs started really going off. By God, I'll get a hammer in, we did. No siren, no air raid warning, nothing at all.
The Battle of Britain was raging as the Luftwaffe tried to obliterate the RAF in the skies, but they'd fought back with ferocity. Now the German Air Force changed tactics, and in mid-August decided to destroy the airfields instead. At Biggin Hill, the men and women on the ground became the targets.
We knew that we'd be off the ground before the bombers got there. We weren't going to be bombed. The poor WAFs and the airmen who serviced our aircraft, they were the ones who got bombed.
The riggers, the fitters, the armourers and hundreds of others kept the fighters in the sky. And working alongside them, the women. There were 200 WAFs at Biggin Hill, and the government was encouraging more and more to join the war effort.
With true military bearing, a detachment of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force returned from a march designed to attract recruits.
Women are urgently required for plotting duties. These plotters play a vital part in the defence of this country.
So go to it, girls.
I particularly remember the young WAFs, girls of 18 and 19 years of age, who serviced the aircraft, got the pilots in the air. Little WAF used to do my washing for me. We would never have existed without these youngsters.
27-year-old Corporal Elspeth Henderson came to Biggin Hill from Edinburgh, where she'd worked as a secretary.
My mother joined the WAF because she wanted to see more action. I know she also felt that it was wrong that young men should leave wives and family while she, a single woman, continued to enjoy civilian life.
Elspeth worked in the operations room at Biggin Hill, where as a sector station, the WAFs relayed vital information about enemy action. But the WAFs were also taking on tasks as varied as plotters and cooks to aircraft mechanics and telephone operators. Up till now, their roles had been important, but not dangerous. On the 18th of August, though, they found themselves in the firing line. One of Elspeth's WAF colleagues was manning the telephones in the armoury. She had followed 601 Squadron from Hendon to Biggin Hill.
Elizabeth Mortimer was about 28. She was popular, like they all were.
At 1:30 in the afternoon, a black cloud of German bombers headed across the southeast. As Elizabeth got on with her duties on the airfield, life went on in Biggin Hill village, and 19-year-old Norman Blundell headed to the pub with his father.
That was a regular thing. My old man, he always liked to be on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And war or no war, we could have a pint.
The King's Arms backed onto the airfield, and as Norman and his dad arrived for their Sunday drink, so did something else. The bombs.
Father and me were outside the pub, and we saw German bombers, Dorniers, going through there, and you can look, well, it's on top of it, it's just going treetop heights. And then another flipping bomber come from behind us and dropped this bomb into the road that caused all the problems.
The pub was hit, and Norman's father, seriously injured by flying shrapnel, was taken to hospital. Norman and his younger brother Mick, in a state of shock, stumbled the 3 miles home.
After a little while, Nora and Mick came walking up the road, you see, and we said, "What are you limping for?" He said, "I think I've been hit." His shoe was full of blood. When we really looked, and so I thought, crikey, we better get him to hospital. How the hell do we do that? We had to go through the back lanes to get there. And father was in hospital, yeah.
He had his leg cut off and terrible things.
Yeah. So it's a bit sort of traumatic at that particular time.
As the waves of bombers came over, back at the aerodrome, Elizabeth Mortimer continued to man the telephones in the armoury. Everyone else took cover in the shelters, but Elizabeth didn't. She knew she was doing a vital job.
And when they all appeared, they saw that Biggin Hill was burning. The aircraft on the ground, the administrative buildings, the ops room, all on fire. There was no sign of Elizabeth Mortimer. But as the dust settled, they saw in the far distance, and she was thrusting a flag in all the places where she thought there was an unexploded bomb.
Down in the village, 6-year-old Jeff Greensmith and his family took cover. They'd escaped the bombs, but Jeff was about to get closer than he ever thought to the enemy.
Our air raid shelter, you would actually look out through the door, above the blast wall, which was in front, and see a patch of daylight. The underside of an aeroplane appeared with German crosses and swastika on the tail. And it was burning smoke out the back. And it went over the top of the house. The slates on the house lifted up, went back down again. And this thing slammed into the field at the back, where we'd been playing an hour before.
As Jeff's neighbour ran to rescue the German pilot from the burning wreckage, back on base, Elizabeth was still guiding the British pilots home. 90 bombs had littered the airfield, and the returning squadrons had no idea where it was safe to land. But as Elizabeth strode across the airfield with her red flags, one bomb exploded, catapulting her sideways.
When an officer reached her, she was lying on the ground, gasping for breath. She kept insisting she was all right. And when he was out of sight, Elizabeth Mortimer limped round their airfield, continuing to plant those flags. And the reason, there was a squadron operational, and among the pilots was her boyfriend, and she wanted them to know where it wasn't safe to land. For that action, she became the first WAF in Great Britain to win the Military Medal for Bravery.
As the airbase was witnessing immense courage, down in the village, 6-year-old Jeff was confronted with the human side of war.
And on the same raid, we had a German airman that landed in the front garden.
The little boy from Kent had never expected to come face to face with the enemy.
He had blood down here and he was quite badly damaged. But he had 2 kids, photographs, which he showed us. They were, I don't know, 7, 8 maybe. And he cried. Tears ran down his face. He didn't have horns, didn't have a tail. He was just like us. And like a kid, he could cry. But that affected me, yeah, still does.
August the 18th had been shocking. 2 people were killed, and Norman's father lost his leg. But Elizabeth Mortimer's actions helped all the returning squadrons land safely. That night at least, she was reunited with her boyfriend. But with life so precarious, opportunities were never missed to live and love at Biggin Hill.
There were some very nice and pretty girls, yeah. I actually married one.
Romance? I don't think I'd call it romance. If you're talking about women, yes. had certain types which you admired. They'd have a good figure, good bosom. Yeah, all the things that a healthy man likes.
I was friendly with a young girl, WAF once, but only very, very friendly. She was frightened of the bombing, and we used to sit together in an air raid shelter, holding each other's hands. I remember that.
My father was immensely excited to be told that a whole group of WAF officers were coming onto the aerodrome. Smythe and I wandered down the road to the WAF officers' mess. Others had apparently been on the same trail because, as I learnt much later, Pang Beecroft, on seeing us approach, had said, "Oh no, not more bloody pilot officers."
Luckily for Jeremy, his father's charm won the day, and the subsequent wedding of a heroic pilot officer and a dedicated young WAF was a propaganda coup for the RAF.
RAF romance, it says here. Squadron Leader D. Hamilton Grice, DFC, and Section Leader Pamela Beecroft are to marry at Penn next month. They met at a fighter station.
Incredibly, romance, having a pint in the pub, normal life, all continued as Biggin Hill now got used to routine attacks.
Yeah, literally every day the bombers would come over. Biggin Hill and the surrounding airfields, Kenley and Croydon, were under constant attack.
The southeast of England became known as Hell's Corner.
It was there, it was happening, and you just got on with it, you know. And turn around and say, "You got any Germans coming over?" "Oh yes," you know. One bomb landed in quite in the vicinity and blew me over the fence. Quite hair-raising, actually.
It had been a kind of 9 to 5 war. Your sirens went at 9 in the morning and you'd finished late in the afternoon. Everybody went home, licked their wounds and came back the next day.
But all that was about to change, with tragic consequences.
And I heard these aircraft coming and climbed up the tree, and this was 6 o'clock in the evening. We'd had a real tough day, and it couldn't be the Germans.
Dad was going to go around the corner to the local sweet shop to get some tea, and they just got to the door here where I've spotted these coming towards us, and "Dad, look.
There were 10 of them. There were 3, and one tail end Charlie on the left-hand side. And I was watching them come in. I could hear this voice, and I looked down, and this man was saying, get down, they're Germans."
"Christ," he says, "they're Jerry's." Boom! He pushed me to the ground.
And I looked again, and they just got into my view, and I could see the black crosses underneath the wings. And I fell down the tree. I wasn't frightened. I just wanted to get indoors and get under the bed, which is where we went when such things happen.
Then the noise started. The bombs started really going off. By God, I'll get a hammer in, we did. And no siren, nothing at all.
There were different sounds. The bombs vibrated the ground, and the gunfire vibrated in the air.
Shortly after the all clear, chalk dust started settling on things. It was a really horrendous mess. It was that white tinge on everything. We knew something serious had gone wrong then.
The airfield had been taken by complete surprise, and the consequences were devastating.
When Dad finally got back to camp, he was shocked.
The WAF shelter, a high explosive, blew the entrance door, and the whole shelter caved in, and these WAFs were entombed.
Amongst the WAFs buried inside was Elspeth Henderson.
And Dad was given a shovel, shown where to dig, and told to dig.
They were digging with their hands, and they were digging with any implements they could find, frantically trying to release them.
To get them all out, they had to dig all night. Apparently the milkman arrived with the morning milk for the camp. Once he found out what was going on, he sort of sod the milk, this is big, sod the milk, picked up a shovel and joined in.
By sunrise, the shelter was clear. Elspeth and all but one WAF had survived. But a direct hit on the airman's shelter had caused unparalleled damage, killing almost everyone inside. A black day for Biggin Hill had seen 39 people die.
When he came home, he was literally chalk dust all over him, in a shaking condition. To be frank, it was perhaps the only thing that frightened us. Seen poor old Dad like that, he'd see what he'd seen.
The airbase had withstood the onslaught of August the 30th, but the bombs kept coming. How would Biggin Hill and Britain survive?
One afternoon, there was one hell of a lot of bombers, and there was only 6 Spitfires took off the airfield. That's all we could muster.
The Battle of Britain was fierce. Biggin Hill had endured a terrible August as the aerodrome and surrounding villages were pummeled by German bombs. Biggin Hill woke on the morning of August the 31st and had little time to digest the horrors and loss of life of the previous day's raids. Corporal Elspeth Henderson had been trapped in the air raid shelter, but returned to her duties the very next day.
My mother was manning telephone line for 11 group, along with other lines, and was then passing on messages as appropriate to various people within the station.
Working with Elspeth was Helen Turner. In her 40s, she was older than most WAFs and was a veteran of the First World War.
Helen Turner was a sergeant. She was on the telephone talking to headquarters of Fighter Command.
At 6:38 that evening, bombers appeared on the horizon, hoping to wipe Biggin Hill out for good. The WAFs continued with their work, with nothing but a flimsy roof between them and the bombers.
Helen Turner was told to take cover, and she refused. She carried on.
My understanding is that non-essential personnel were asked to leave, but my mother stayed at her post.
A 500-pound high explosive came straight through the ops room, bounced off the safe.
It destroyed the plotting table. There was glass flying everywhere.
Helen Turner was knocked all over the place. The blast also knocked down Elspeth Henderson.
At that particular moment, Group Captain Grice came through the door to see how things were doing, and he was himself injured by flying glass, and his pipe was knocked out of his mouth. They came outside. She was coughing and spluttering and leant against the nearest object and was asked by a warrant officer to move away because they were leaning against an unexploded bomb.
For tenaciously refusing to leave their posts, Elspeth Henderson and Helen Turner were awarded the Military Medal for Bravery.
She'd been the senior WAF on duty, and the award was in recognition of everyone's efforts, not just hers.
Only 6 women won the military medal during the Second World War, and 3 of them had come from Biggin Hill during those dangerous weeks of August 1940.
The damage to Biggin Hill after the raids of August the 30th and August the 31st was so bad that it was amazing that station was ever used again. Not only were the runways, but there were the hangars, the ops room, aircraft on the ground were on fire.
The services, the gas, the water, electricity were disrupted, so a lot of things couldn't function. The cookhouse couldn't work. We had food in the cafe. I think my dad actually gave a lot of it away because the people there that needed food and we had stuff in to cook because our gas stove actually worked.
An emergency operations room set up in a village shop was brought into immediate use, and the people of Biggin Hill opened their doors to the men and women of the aerodrome.
There were a lot of houses taken over in the village by the airmen, and it all just came part of our life, that there was Air Force colour in the village.
Biggin Hill had survived a terrible August, but never stopped being operational. On September the 15th, all 3 squadrons were in action. The RAF was still close to the edge, but so were the Germans, and it would prove to be the climax of the battle.
Massive attack, all-out attack by the Luftwaffe. Almost every aircraft they had available was launched, and we launched every aircraft that we had. There was no reserve left on the ground for the Battle of Britain.
That day, southeast England witnessed an unending wave of dogfights dancing in the skies, and the orchards of Kent were littered with the wrecks of German aircraft. By mid-September, the shape of the war was changing. Stray bombs dropped on the civilians of Croydon prompted retaliatory strikes on Berlin. Incensed, Hitler turned his attention to the cities of Britain, and the Blitz began.
You could stand and watch the planes flying up the Thames, unloading their bombs, turning round, and this huge fire which lasted all night.
As the cities bore the brunt, Hitler had unknowingly provided Biggin Hill and the southeast aerodromes valuable time to regroup.
It wasn't until the end, when the German attack thinned out a bit, that you realise that we're winning the battle.
With winter approaching, Operation Sea Lion was no longer within Hitler's grasp. The threat of the German invasion had passed. The pilots and people of Biggin Hill had played their role in stopping Hitler in his tracks.
They set the tone. They showed us that the Germans could be defeated. And so at the back of our head, when we went into battle either in North Africa or in Italy or in Europe later in the war, we knew that the Germans could be defeated.
Many dark days were still to come. But for now, Britain and Biggin Hill could rejoice that they had won the first round.
I was defending our English way of life and the whole of the country where possible. I know we were only allotted one small piece.
I just look upon it as part of my life which I was lucky to survive through.
544 Royal Air Force pilots lost their lives in the Battle of Britain, 45 of them flying out of Biggin Hill.
It was the sacrifice of life that she was concerned about, and concerned in later years that it might be forgotten.
Brave? No, bloody fear. You do things and you're not aware of it at the time. Whether it's bravery or bloody stupidity, you don't know. You do it.
Really now, when you really get to think about it, and afterwards when you think about it, they were unique. Absolutely unique, those guys were.
So I'm glad I lived through it. But again, I could have done without it.
Over the next 5 years, more pilots, WAFs and airmen would find their home at Biggin Hill Aerodrome. And in 1943, it would become the first fighter station to claim its 1000th kill. They kept fighting, and in 1945, Britain would celebrate victory and Germany's surrender.
Put it this way, we kept our end up. You know? Trying it could be, thrilling it could be, frightening it could be, but we beat them.
For the next 50 years, members of the Royal Air Force would call Biggin Hill home. And each year, thousands of people still flocked to the famous Biggin Hill Air Show.
I think that men and women of 1940 set for this country an ideal. One, that we were not going to be defeated, irrespective of what was thrown at us. Two, with patience and forbearance, we could win. It was a glorious period for both men and women in many ways. Tough, hard, but a period where they were at their excellent best, I think, really.
In 16 long weeks of danger, bravery and incredible spirit, they had ensured that the name Biggin Hill would never be forgotten.
We were very proud to be part of Biggin Hill because we did think we were helping to win the war with those airmen.
And Biggin Hill became a bit like the fighter pilots, a sort of heroic base, really. It took on a heroic dimension because it didn't give up. It just kept going.
Everybody did what was expected of them. I don't think we should ever forget.